Thank you for joining us today. I know some of you are already familiar with alternatives, and I'm happy to see some new faces here today. I would love to show you around after the presentation so that we can get to know each other a little bit better. I want to introduce Suzette Bray, LMFD, is the founder and Executive Director of Village Counseling and Wellness, a provider of comprehensive DBT for adults and adolescents. With over 20 years of clinical experience, Suzette has run several innovative mental health programs for adults, teens, and children and families, giving her unique insight into strategies and solutions for positive change. Suzette is an intensively trained DBT therapist and has also received advanced training in DBT from thought leaders in the field. She has trained and supervised many clinicians and has significant teaching experience at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. She speaks and trains often on the topic of DBT, and I am very excited to have her speak with you guys today and present on this very wonderful topic. And here's Suzette.
I'm ready. Hi, everybody. Hi. I am glad to be here. I always like the introduction because it reminds me that, like, maybe I've done something with my life. So what are we going to talk about today? All right, so topics for today. A quick little overview of DBT in general. What is DBT as you do? What is this adaptation for substance use? What's the difference between the two? And then we're going to talk about DBT skills for substance use, the specific skills. Anybody teaching DBT skills? Anybody working for a program that offers DBT skills? Okay, great. So I have some information for you guys. And the first thing I want to say is that there's a big caveat to what I'm going to tell you today, because I'm not of your world. I am not a substance use person. I didn't come up through substance abuse world. I am going to say things that you're going to think, that's not right, or duh. Okay, and just bear with me. I'm coming from a very different approach and from a very different background. I come from emotional dysregulation world, from BPD world. Okay, and I could put the criteria from the DSM for BPD up here, but this is kind of the reconfiguration of BPD, borderline personality disorder, that Marsha Linehan looks at when we're looking at treating disorders of emotional dysregulation. And so where all of these fit into those diagnostic category, all of those DSM stuff that's up there, but we kind of conceptualize it a little bit differently. Okay, so we've got emotional dysregulation, we have affective lability, we've got moods that change, and they change fast, and sometimes they change out of nowhere, just boom. Somebody has the quickest little thought, and they're gone. Right? We've got problems with anger, frequent, intense anger. It's really out of proportion with what's really going on with the actual situation. We've got chaotic relationships, fears of abandonment. We've got self-dysregulation. That's the differences, not the differences, the confusion about identity, the not really strong sense of self, those chronic feelings of emptiness. That's part of this self-dysregulation portion. And then we've got behavioral dysregulation, suicidal ideation, suicidal actions, non-suicidal self-injury, cutting, burning, whatever, and impulsive behavior. That's where our substance abuse stuff comes in. It's where our eating disorder stuff comes in. And then cognitive dysregulation. We've got dissociation, really common in the folks that come to our programs, just checking out, going bye-bye whenever emotions get too high. And also transient paranoia. It's not the kind of paranoia where you line your hat with tinfoil because, the FBI is trying to get into your brain. It's really this more kind of, I know what you're thinking, ooh, she hates me. Oh my God, she gave me this look and I just know it in my heart that she hates me. Don't worry, I'm acting right now. I'm not losing it right in front of you. But that's transient paranoia, where you just have that feeling that that people are kind of against you, and you can come up with stuff to make it make sense. So the other thing about DBT that I always like to talk about is our conceptualization of why folks have difficulty regulating emotion. And I love this because it reduces our judgments of these folks. So we've got this idea that some people are born with a high level of emotional sensitivity. They just shoot out of the womb that way. And I bet you, especially therapists in this room, I bet a lot of us, I'm gonna raise my hand and join that club, have a high level of emotional sensitivity. It's required for empathy, it's required for compassion, it's required for all of that. But we combine it with a couple other things. So if you've got a high level of sensitivity, you're gonna have big emotional fields. You got big receptors, right? So you're gonna react more strongly. And for our folks, they go up and then they have a really slow return to baseline. And if you pair this with the difficulty regulating emotion, then we've got a little bit of a problem, right? Also, our folks often have a biological vulnerability for impulsivity, right? Just the brain's built that way. Prefrontal cortex is not as online as with the average person. And then what happens is you have folks who behave impulsively, you have folks who have strong emotional reactions, and what happens? Everybody kind of goes, huh, drama queen, what's up with you? Get up yourself, that's the big deal. Hey, could you just stop doing that? And so that's called invalidation, right? People not understanding our personal experience. And that's part of how we regulate emotion, is by, we get it. Have you ever had the experience of just sitting across from somebody and they get what you're talking about? And you say, yes, thank you. You get it, and you calm right down, right? But if you're being invalidated in that way a lot, right? What happens is the emotions go up, the emotional expressions get bigger, and what happens is you learn to self-invalidate. And then you go to, so pathetic, why do I react this way so bigly all the time? So bigly, in such a big way all the time. What's wrong with me? I can't trust my own emotional experience, right? So I don't regulate out, right? Then my environment generally unintentionally reinforces my displays of emotion, whether it's me not being accurate in my emotional expression just to make you happy, or you don't listen until it's big, until I am screaming, running naked on fire through the living room. And then you say, okay, I'll help you out with that problem, right? So this is kind of the theory that we have for how folks have trouble regulating emotions. These are my people. This is what I treat, right? This is what I know how to do. And also with this comes a lot of other stuff, a lot of co-occurring disorders, depression, panic disorder, all this stuff. Well, I know how to do this kind of stuff. So I had BPD walking through my door, lots of emotional dysregulation. This kind of stuff, no, I'm a professional mental health therapist. I can do this stuff, right? But then what happened is this walk through the door. A huge number of the people presenting with borderline personality disorder with problems of emotional dysregulation are also coming in with substance use diagnoses. Or if not a diagnosis, behaviors that were in this realm. And I went, I don't know how to treat that. How do I do that? Right? So I realized that I needed to learn more about it, right? So, and I bet, how many folks are substance use world folks here? So I noticed people with BPD with substance use coming in the door. I bet you noticed this. A lot of BPD coming in your door with substance use as the primary diagnosis, but then you're noticing that the treatments that you're doing aren't helping as much. You've got folks who are dysregulating when you're doing certain things. They're reacting really strongly to stuff that other people aren't reacting really strongly to. So, here's our problem. This combination of borderline personality disorder and substance use disorder, it's commonly called the troublesome combination, because BPD plus substance use disorder has a far higher level of these problems: psychological problems, severity of psychological problems, higher risk of suicide, higher risk of suicidal behaviors. That's why we all have to be talking to each other, right? We've got to be working together to identify our folks who have personality disorders in addition to substance use disorders. Everybody in this room, I think, is a lot younger than me. But when I went to grad school, and granted it was my second career, I was a fashion designer before I was a therapist. Yes, in the 80s, where there was cocaine everywhere, and your hair was high, and your shoulder pads were big, and your skirts were short. You're awesome, right? Mm-hmm. But I was told to stay away from those people. And I was even taught in grad school, my professors would lean forward in kind of a conspiratorial way and tell me and the other students about how to avoid working with those people, right? And they were generally telling me about loud borderline personality disorder, right? The suicidal threats, the really intense anger, the stomping out of your office. And I was trained how not to take those into your practice, right? But then I learned after a while, some folks with BPD are crayons. They're really quiet. They're suffering in silence. And we're missing huge numbers of people because our perception of BPD is this. We're also missing on diagnosing BPD in people, and I'm not saying let's diagnose all over the place. I'm not thrilled with this title. I'm not thrilled with this label of BPD. But we've got people who we have an evidence-based treatment that works really well who aren't getting the treatment because I like them. So many people come in, they've got a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and then they go to different therapists or different psychiatrists, and they say, you can't have that, you don't have that. And it's basically because of likability, because of not these overt, loud symptomology, right? So what's happening is they're suffering in silence, and they're quietly maybe dying on us, maybe cutting, maybe hurting themselves, because we don't want to give people that label. And we don't have to. We can call it emotional dysregulation. This is my pitch. We have an evidence-based treatment for these folks that maybe you guys weren't taught to avoid, but people of my generation were taught to avoid, that they were untreatable, that there was nothing that would work for them. And there are treatments that work. So, a little bit about the effectiveness of the adaptation of DBT SUD. We've got randomized controlled trials in DBT world. We're all over that, right? That's the idea. Is Marshall Linehan, the creator of DBT, always talks about if the research shows it doesn't work, it gets pulled. If the research shows that another treatment works better, we'll stop doing DBT and we'll start doing that treatment. Because these people are suffering, okay? And if you ever get a chance, look up Marshall Linehan, look up her story. There's a wonderful article. She came out about 4 years ago. New York Times told her story about why she decided to develop DBT. And she was on a trip to a hospital, and she was going on a tour, and she realized that the room they were touring her in was the room where she spent much of her late teens and early 20s as a patient of this psychiatric hospital. So she devoted her life to finding a treatment and researching the heck out of it that would help people out of hell. She's an amazing woman. We've got a lot of stuff. Now here's the deal though. DBT is not yet a standalone treatment for substance use disorders alone. It's gold standard for BPD and substance use disorder combined in one person, but it's not totally there yet for on its own. And even the woman, Linda DeMatt, who helped create it with Marshall Linehan, says that it's good. It's as good as anything else out there. This is what her research indicates, but it's not quite there as a standalone treatment. Okay, so, yes,
Questions okay?
absolutely.
So, could you just repeat that? Did you just say that BPD and SUD are treated effectively with DBT?
Yes.
But SUD by itself is not?
It is. It's testing out in the few randomized controlled trials that have been done so far. It's testing out as good or better than other, but they're still saying test it more, test it more, test it more. We've just got 2 randomized controlled trials.
Okay.
It's good stuff. It really is. It's just a hard treatment to learn and a really expensive one to provide. Okay, DBT in a nutshell. Comprehensive. It is a cognitive behavioral treatment at its heart. There's a little bit of an addition to it, though. Well, a couple of additions. For complex, difficult to treat mental health issues. Originally, the first people were chronically suicidal folks. Lots of other stuff that it's evidence-based for, bipolar, no, I won't go into the list. So it addresses all those things I showed you on that BPD slide, but basically lack of interpersonal self-regulation and distress tolerance skills. And it combines behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, Eastern mindfulness practice with the emphasis on mindfulness, and dialectical worldview. Dialectical thinking is the idea that 2 opposing viewpoints can both be true at the same time. And part of the problem for our folks is that they get really heavily into black and white thinking. You know, if I am having a bad day today, my life is terrible, it always will be terrible, and I must end it immediately. I will always be in pain. Okay, and we all know that change is just the way things work. We can have a sucky day today, and maybe tomorrow will be better, or maybe it won't be better for a while, but we know things are going to change. But the idea is to be able to hold those 2 opposing viewpoints, that things suck now and they will change, is a really hard thing to do. There's even an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote where he talks about the indicator of a first-class mind is the ability to hold 2 opposing viewpoints at the same time without kind of having your head explode. So, acceptance and change is our main dialectic in DBT. You talk to a DBT therapist, and we're always doing this all the time because we're trying to balance opposing viewpoints. So, what are our modalities of treatment? Individual psychotherapy. One of the main tools of this is the diary card, behavioral chain analysis, all of that. So it's a very structured treatment. It is a super hard treatment to change from being a regular talk therapist to that, because it is not free-flowing. You're grabbing that diary card, you're figuring out what the highest level behavior it is, and then you're doing a chain. It's hard for clients who have had lots of previous therapy. I think I read the last statistic I read is for people entering DBT, they'd have something like a mean number of therapists at between 6 and 7 therapists prior to coming to a DBT program. So people have been trained up in kind of like, hey, how was your week therapy, where the client kind of runs the therapy rather than remaining structured. And I'll get to why that's problematic in a bit. Skills training, DBT skills training, I'll talk about what that is. Phone coaching, between session generalization of the skills taught in skills training. So let's say my target behavior is when I get emotionally distressed, I drive to the 7-Eleven, I buy 2 2-liter bottles of Diet Coke, and I pour it over somebody's head, and I feel so much better. Even when like that little, like when the click happens and then you pull it off in the little smoke and that sound, right? It's wonderful. It works so well. The problem is that everything's sticky and no one will talk to me anymore, right? So I'm beginning in DBT, or my SUDs, my subjective units of distress, are really, really high. And I have used all the skills I have, and I don't know what to do next. I text my therapist, or I call my therapist, and they get back to me. I've made an agreement. I'm not getting out of the car and going into the 7-Eleven until I hear from my therapist. but he or she is going to give me ideas about what other skills to use or clarify my skills use. Oh my gosh, you decided to use this type of skill when this one might have worked better. Okay, go for it. Back in the game. Skills coaching is very rapid. It's not about life problems in general. It's about getting through this small problem and moving back into life. So it's generalizing skills into the environment. And then consultation team. That's where therapists get together and they do DBT on each other. If we don't have this, it's not DBT. It's really important. Unless you have all the categories going on at the same time, you are not doing DBT. You may be doing DBT skills training, which is awesome. Everybody should have DBT skills training. There's a wonderful new book for teachers in the school system to be able to teach the DBT skills to students, which I hope is like given in every health class ever. And the research indicates that if you only have the choice of one of the modalities, do skills training. Okay? But the whole package is why DBT has its reputation as this gold standard of treatment. You've got to do it all before it's considered, the highly evidence-based treatment that it is. Okay. There. Okay. So, our clients have multiple complex problems. They come in and there's always a crisis. Always, 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 right? And so you can spend hours just dealing with the crisis of the week. So we have a very structured format that we use to address problems in DBT, which is we have a hierarchy. We have suicidal and suicidal and self-injuring behavior. And probably some of you are saying, wait, self-injury is not necessarily about suicide. Here's the problem. Here's why it gets ranked up there. Because it does, the last statistic I heard was it makes you 10 times more likely. It's correlated with a 10 times higher likelihood of a completed suicide. Okay, so even though the behavior itself is not usually meant to be about killing yourself, it's correlated with a much higher risk. So we leave it up there. Then we go into therapy interfering behaviors, and that's not just on the client's part of, I don't want to talk about that today, or I think I'm going to leave, or not having their diary card where they record their emotions and their actions ready. It's also the therapist. Because remember, we've got folks with high levels of emotional dysregulation. Sometimes you just don't want to make them mad because you're tired. You don't feel like it today. Let's just have a chatty session. That is therapy interfering behavior, and we target that in the therapist as well as the client. Then we go to quality of life interfering behaviors, which substance abuse and eating disorders fall into, unless they are always on the road to suicidal behavior, okay? So I'm not gonna, substance use is considered down, until I get suicidal and self-harming behaviors under control, I'm not necessarily gonna address substance use behaviors unless I attempt to kill myself. Every time I attempt to kill myself, there's substances involved, or there's eating disordered behavior involved, okay? And then the fourth structure of DBT is increasing skills to make life changes.